This isn't a video about Houston's home prices suddenly crashing, nor is it a story about buyers disappearing, and it's definitely not another dramatic housing market headline. The real change is happening in the balance of power. Houston isn't crashing, it isn't collapsing, it isn't turning into a buyer's paradise overnight either. Something quieter is happening. The balance of power in Houston is shifting, and most people won't notice until they're already in a negotiation, wondering why it feels different than it did 2 years ago. Buyers now have more homes to choose from. Homes are sitting on the market longer. Sellers are competing on price and terms in ways they weren't a year ago. Builders are dangling rate buydowns and closing cost credits to pull buyers towards new construction. And through all of that, sales actually went up in June. Pending contracts climbed and the median price barely moved. So this isn't a dead market. It's a market that's becoming pickier, more balanced, and a lot more dependent on strategy. That's the shift that's worth understanding because it changes how you should approach buying or selling in Houston right now. Starting with what actually happened in June of 2026 across Greater Houston, single-family home sales rose 3.5% year over year, landing a little over 8,800 homes sold compared with 8,500 the June before. Pending sales climbed roughly 12%, which tells you buyers actively stayed strong through the summer selling season. The median price of a single-family home held near $345,000, almost identical to a year earlier. The average price ticked up about 1% to roughly $455,000, though that number got pulled upward by the luxury segment, where we saw sales of homes at $1 million or more jump by 17%. Homes took a little bit longer to sell, moving from 50 days to 52 days on market, and active listings reached almost 39,000, up 2% from last year, which left the Greater Houston market with about 5.2 months of inventory heading into July. None of that says the demand disappeared. More homes sold, more contracts got signed, prices stayed close to stable. What changed is the environment buyers made those purchases in. They had more time, more options, and less pressure to act the moment a listing hit the market. I'm Thomas Priddy, a lifelong Houstonian and Cypress resident. I work with buyers, sellers, and people just like you relocating into Greater Houston. If any of what I'm about to talk about applies to your situation, my contact information is in the description. There's no pressure, just a real conversation whenever you're ready. The numbers are the headline. What they actually mean for you is where this gets useful. Active, but not rushed. It's tempting to see rising sales and assume Houston flipped back into a strong seller's market. That's not what's happening. Sales went up, but inventory stayed elevated alongside of it. Homes sold, but they took longer to get there. Contracts increased, yet buyers had more listings to weigh before signing one. The Houston Association of Realtors described this as more breathing room for both sides of the table. Correctly priced homes still moved. Buyers just stopped feeling like they had to grab the first acceptable option in front of them. And that distinction matters more than it sounds like it should. In a tight seller's market, fear drives buyers' decisions. People waive inspections. They overlook real issues with a property. They stretch past their budget because they're convinced nothing else comparable will ever come along. June's housing market ran differently. Buyers could compare one neighborhood against another, a resale home against new construction, a listing from yesterday against one that's been sitting for 2 months, a seller offering nothing versus one covering closing costs. Comparison is where leverage starts, and Houston buyers had more of it this summer. One number sits underneath almost everything I just described, and most people scroll right past it without realizing what it's telling them. That number is 5.2 months of inventory. It's an estimate of how long the current housing supply would take to sell at June's pace if nothing new got listed. It's not perfect, and it shifts neighborhood by neighborhood and price point by price point, but it's a useful read on supply versus demand. Houston isn't running on the extreme scarcity it saw earlier in the decade. At 5.2 months, the market sits much closer to balanced. That doesn't hand every buyer control of every negotiation. It means most buyers have alternatives, and alternatives are what create leverage in the first place. A buyer with one realistic option lets the seller set the terms. A buyer weighing 6 comparable homes forces every seller in that group to justify why theirs deserves attention. Sometimes that justification is price. Sometimes it's condition, lower property taxes, a better lot, a stronger school, or a seller willing to fund part of the buyer's monthly payment. Inventory is what forces that competition into the open. Inventory tells you buyers have choices. Days on market tells you how sellers are reacting to that fact. The average single family home took 52 days to sell in June, up from 50 the year before. 2 extra days doesn't sound significant, but the level underneath it does. Because a market where homes routinely need 7 or 8 weeks feels nothing like one where sellers expect multiple offers in the first weekend. Longer market time changes how sellers think. In week 1, most are focused on maximizing price. By week 5 or 6, the questions shift. Why are buyers touring without offering? Did a competing listing sell first? Is the price out of step with the recent comparable sales? Would a concession solve whatever's holding buyers back? Not every slow-moving listing is a bargain. Some homes sit because of real condition problems, a tough location, or a price that never matched reality. But a market time can reveal motivation. A seller who's been listed for 50 days often negotiates differently than one who just entered the market yesterday. And buyers who treat days on market as a clue rather than just a number tend to negotiate better. A stable median price sounds like nothing has changed, but that isn't telling you the full story. Houston's median single-family home price held near $345,000, and that stability matters. It shows the city wasn't in the middle of a broad price collapse, but what it doesn't show is how many sellers cut their asking price before a sale closed, what concessions got negotiated along the way, or whether a seller contributed towards closing costs or financing. A home could list at $375,000, drop to $360,000, and eventually sell for $350,000 with a closing credit attached. The recorded price still supports a stable median. The path to that price tells a completely different story about who held the leverage. If the median price doesn't show us the negotiation, then something else does. We can look at how often sellers are cutting their price in the first place. A price reduction usually means a gap opened up between what a seller expected and what buyers are willing to pay. Sometimes sellers price based on what a neighbor got a year ago, while buyers are pricing based on today's monthly payment, today's competing inventory, and today's financing terms. When those two views don't line up, the listing sits, and eventually the price moves. The reduction alone doesn't guarantee a value. A home that was significantly overpriced can still be overpriced after the first cut. What matters most is whether that new price actually lines up with the current comparable sales and competition. For sellers, that's a reason to take the first 2 or 3 weeks of a listing seriously, since that's when a property gets its strongest online exposure. Price too high out of the gate, and that window closes fast, sometimes before buyers even get a fair look at the home. For buyers, a reduction combined with longer market time, a vacant property, a previously failed contract, or direct competition from a nearby builder is worth investigating rather than ignoring. And everything I've covered so far sits on top of one number that neither buyers or sellers control. Mortgage rates stayed one of the biggest constraints on the Houston housing market through June. Freddie Mac reported an average 30-year fixed rate of 6.49% on June 25th. And the weekly numbers barely moved through the month. 6.48 on June 4th, 6.52 on the 11th, 6.47 on the 18th, and back to 6.49 by June 25th. That narrow range matters because it means rates weren't shifting enough to meaningfully change what buyers could afford. Take a $345,000 home with 20% down. The loan comes out to roughly $276,000. And at 6.49%, the principal and interest payment runs about $1,743 a month, before property taxes, homeowners insurance, HOA dues, and flood insurance if it's applicable. Those extra costs vary enormously across Houston, because 2 homes at the same sales price can carry very different real payments depending on taxes, insurance zone, and HOA. That's why comparing list prices alone doesn't tell you much. A $350,000 home with lower taxes and a seller-funded rate buydown can end up cheaper monthly than a $335,000 home with higher taxes and no financing help attached. Rates have quietly redefined what value means in this market. It's no longer just what a home costs. It's what it costs every single month. Builder incentives are one of the biggest factors shaping buyer leverage in Houston right now. Through 2026, area builders heavily on rate buydowns, closing cost credits, upgrade packages, and occasional price cuts to keep inventory moving. I've seen incentive packages run anywhere from $10,000 to $35,000 depending on the builder, the community, and how much unsold inventory they're sitting on. And most of that value comes through financing help rather than a straight price cut. And that distinction matters because builders have a strong incentive to protect their list price. A visible price cut can drag down comparable sales across the entire community. So instead of cutting the price, a builder is more likely to offer a temporary or permanent rate buydown, closing cost help, design upgrades, appliances, or a reduced lot premium. For resale sellers, that means the competition isn't just the builder's sticker price down the street. It's the builder's entire package. A new home listed at $365,000 can end up cheaper at closing and lower monthly than a resale home at $350,000 once the rate buydown and closing cost credit could factor in. Resale sellers who aren't tracking what nearby builders are offering are competing against numbers they can't even see. Buyers, don't mistake any of that for free money, because not every incentive is actually a good deal once you look closer. An advertised lower rate often requires using the builder's preferred lender, and that lender's fees can differ from what you'd get shopping the open market. The rate itself might be temporary. A design credit doesn't carry the same real value as a direct closing cost credit, even when those numbers look similar on paper. For example, let's take a 2-1 buydown. It lowers your rate for the first 2 years before resetting to the full note rate. That works fine if you understand the eventual payment and you genuinely can afford it. But it becomes a real problem if the purchase only makes sense at that temporary first year rate. The comparison that actually matters isn't incentive versus no incentive. It's the builder's total price, rate, fees, and credits weighed against your best financing option over however long you realistically expect to own the home. A good incentive improves the deal. It shouldn't be the reason you stop doing the math. So where does all of this actually put buyers in a strong position? Not everywhere. In specific, identifiable situations. Leverage tends to concentrate where several conditions overlap. A property that's been listed longer than comparable homes nearby. A seller who's already cut the price once. A vacant home. A seller working against a relocation timeline. A property that needs cosmetic work. A listing competing directly with new construction. Maybe the seller's sitting on substantial equity, or a home that came back on the market after a prior contract fell through. Now, none of those guarantee that a seller accepts an aggressive offer. It does build a stronger case for one though. Leverage weakens considerably on a home that's newly listed, priced accurately, in excellent shape, and sitting in a neighborhood where supply is still tight. Houston doesn't move as one market. Conditions shift by neighborhood, school zone, property type, and price point. In June, homes priced between $150,000 and $249,000 saw sales jump 14.4%, while $250,000 to $499,000 range dipped 1.1%. The $500,000 to $999,000 range fell 2.9%, and the $1 million plus segment rose 17.1%. One price range can feel competitive while another feels wide open, which is exactly why citywide numbers only tell you the direction. Your specific segment tells you the strategy. So, what should you actually do with all of this? Let's start with the buyers. Get a complete financing picture before you start touring homes. Know your payment at the full rate, not just an introductory one. Compare total ownership costs across properties, not just list price. Factor in taxes, insurance, flood exposure, HOA dues, and likely maintenance. Pay attention to listings with real market time behind them. A home sitting at 45 or 60 days often opens a different kind of negotiation than one that hit the market yesterday. Weigh resale homes against builder inventory directly, including rates, credits, warranties, taxes, upgrades, and how future builder competition might affect resale value down the line. And negotiate for whatever actually solves your affordability problem. Whether that's a lower price, closing cost help, a permanent rate buydown, repairs, or a flexible closing date. The strongest outcome isn't always the one with the biggest headline discount. It's the one that leaves you in the best overall financial position. Now, let's flip this around because sellers are working with a different playbook entirely. Increased buyer leverage doesn't mean homes stopped selling. More than 8,800 single-family homes sold in June of 2026, and pending sales rose over 12%. Buyers were active. They were just choosier about where they spent their offer. That means sellers need to compete intentionally. Price against current active and recently sold comparables, not the highest sell from a year or two ago. Handle obvious maintenance issues before the home goes live, since those are exactly what push a buyer towards a competing listing. Know what nearby builders are offering. Watch showing activity and buyer feedback closely in the first 2 weeks. And stay open to concessions that improve your actual net outcome, even if they don't look like a clean price cut. Some sellers would rather fund a rate buy down than lower their price. Others prefer a straightforward adjustment over doing repairs. And there's no single right structure. It just depends on the property, the demand around it, and your own financial position. So back to the question where this all started. Is a major shift underway in Houston housing? Yeah, it's already here. Inventory is giving more buyers alternatives. Homes are taking longer to sell. A stable median price is making real room to negotiate underneath it. Mortgage rates are forcing buyers to focus on total monthly cost instead of sticker price. Builder incentives are putting real pressure on resale sellers, and leverage is moving toward buyers, though unevenly across neighborhoods and price ranges. Houston isn't freezing up, it's just normalizing. June showed an active market with rising sales and pending contracts, sitting alongside 5.2 months of inventory, longer selling times, and buyers who no longer have to treat every single listing like it's their last shot. For buyers, that opens up room to compare, dig deeper, and negotiate. For sellers, it puts the weight on accurate pricing, real preparation, and staying flexible. The biggest change in Houston right now isn't that prices are rising or falling. It's that the outcome of one of the largest financial decisions in your life depends more heavily on strategy than it has in years. Every figure I cover today is a citywide average. Your street, your price range, and your specific situation can look completely different. And that gap is exactly where a good strategy either works for you or against you. If you're trying to figure out what any of this means for your situation specifically, my contact information is in the description below. Reach out, I'm here to help. And I'll see you in the next video.